righty. Good afternoon and welcome to my office as we are going to discuss briefly what is our purpose. I remember once hearing Garrison Keillor say on his Prairie Home Companion show that cats were God's way of telling us that not everything had to have a purpose. That, I suppose, could be true of my cat, who doesn't seem to have a purpose, but then doesn't seem to care that he doesn't. Cats are one thing, but people are quite another. My cat can live without a purpose, but people cannot, because unlike animals, if you are reading this, you are made in the image of God, created for a divine purpose. This being made in His image renders us self-conscious and intuitively aware, meaning that we are able to originate a thought along with an intuitive sense that there is a God to whom we are accountable. But unlike my cat, who doesn't have a care in the world, we as people cannot help but as moral creatures to have a sense of accountability to someone for some purpose in this life. But for what purpose were you created for? If you consult a dictionary, the definition of purpose states, the reason for which something is done or created or for which something exists. In the book of Genesis, we do see God's purpose statement for mankind. God had intended us to cultivate and explore the earth, enjoy its fruitfulness, and later in chapter 9, to populate the earth through families, cities, and nations. Before things went sour with Adam and Eve, they had the additional purpose of enjoying and communicating with their Creator, while exploring and learning from a world filled with wonder. This, in fact, is what the Westminster Catechism simply states. The chief end of man is to glorify God and to enjoy Him forever. This is actually stupendous, since we have uninterrupted joy, would be arguably the highest goal of mankind. This joy would in fact be the driving motivator for fulfilling God's divine purposes for you, that which includes the Genesis mandate for living in the space between one's birth and death and beyond into eternity. But the world we are now living in has formally ignored and rejected this purpose, or what I often call God's blueprint for living things. So what happens when a transcendent blueprint is redacted except for that purpose is now downgraded to pleasure only? And since purpose can now only then be established provisionally, those original divine purposes, which included joy as a means to fulfilling those purposes, are now made obsolete, removing God's purpose for self-serving pleasure. Since God's primal intentions were vast in their prospects of transcendent meaning and joy, now pleasure, being made to function as purpose, becomes disastrous. For one thing, because man can no longer see his divine purpose. He no longer can assume and enjoy any significance in his own existence, nor meaning in his works. Do we not know that when an object has no true purpose, it's discarded, thrown away as worthless? What then happens to human beings who come to the same conclusion? My guess is that they end up wandering the streets, they end up in institutions, they end up depressed, and some regrettably end up dead. I suspect most end up empty and inwardly miserable. Perhaps a few escape to live an illusion buffered by the supporting circumstances, but only for a season, as Scripture warns of life's transient and tentative nature. So as previously stated, because man lost his bearings on his established purpose, he has been cut loose and driven inevitably toward the abyss of pleasure, madness, and mayhem. The Apostle Peter described this manic mindset as those irrational animals, creatures of instinct, born to be caught and destroyed. As anyone can observe, when people lose all sight of their created purpose in life, things get really ugly, as can now be observed in some of our cities and streets. Yet from out of today's disparaging condition, the psalmist conveys a bright hope. The counsel of the Lord stands forever, the plans of His heart to all generations. The writer of the Proverbs state virtually the same. It is the purpose of the Lord that will stand. Yes, God has one grand purpose that stands out in Scripture, and that is to restore you to your original purpose. Just as our original parents forfeited this purpose due to their sinful rebellion, God had planned through the work of His Son on the cross to remove your sin and reestablish His original plan for your lives, being created for good works. This is the promise to you of fulfillment and everlasting joy, which summons the motivation to accomplish what truly can never fade away, the glory rendered to God through the works of your own hands. And thank you for listening to this. May God bless.